The phone rang just as his mother was about to be fired. The cleaner's son answered the call that no one else wanted to take, and what he discovered that afternoon changed everyone's destiny forever. "Miss Sullivan, pack your things, you're fired." The voice of manager Robert Galloway echoed through the 18th floor of Northwood Corporate Towers like a gunshot. Clara Sullivan dropped the cleaning rag in her hands, her eyes instantly filling with tears she couldn't hold back. "But, Mr. Galloway, please," her voice broke. "I've worked here for 12 years. I've never missed a day. I've never cleaned badly in 12 years. Galloway brutally interrupted her, gesturing towards a smudge on the glass desk. "Look at this. Mr. Valois is about to receive the most important client in this company's history in an hour, and you leave the desk dirty." Michael Sullivan, who had come to pick up his mother after school, witnessed the entire scene from the entrance. He saw Clara's eyes fill with despair, her hands trembling as she tried to wipe away a mark that was barely visible. "Please, Mr. Galloway," Clara pleaded, her dignity crumbling in front of the employees who had peeked out to watch the spectacle. "My son is studying engineering. I need this job. I beg you." "Don't beg me," Galloway shouted, clearly enjoying the power he held over her. "I'm sick of your mediocrity. Security will escort you out immediately." It was then that the executive reception phone rang. Ring, ring, ring. Sophia Harrison, the secretary, had gone out for lunch. The other employees watched the firing scene as if it were entertainment. No one moved to answer. "Aren't you going to answer?" Michael asked, his voice laden with a contained rage that no one noticed. "That phone is for executives," Galloway replied with disdain, without even turning to look at him. "Not for people like you." "Ring, ring, ring," Clara cried silently, packing her cleaning supplies into a cardboard box. 12 years of early mornings, 12 years of sacrifice, 12 years of being invisible to these people who were now mercilessly throwing her out. "Mom." Michael approached her, but Clara shook her head. "Don't make a fuss, Maijo," she whispered. "Don't make things worse." Ring, ring, ring. For heaven's sake, someone answer that damn phone. Edward Valois suddenly appeared from his office, clearly stressed. He was an elegant man in his 50s, but at that moment, he looked exhausted. "Sophia? Where's Sophia?" "She went to lunch, sir," an employee replied. "The most important client of my career is about to arrive, and no one is answering the phone." Valois ran his hands through his hair. "Morrison International can save this company from bankruptcy, and you're all here watching firings as if it were television." It was then that Michael did something that changed everything. He walked to the phone and answered it. Northwood Corporate Towers. The silence in the office was absolute, all eyes fixed on the 8-year-old who had dared to answer the executive phone. "What the hell is that kid doing?" Galloway roared, but Valois raised a hand to silence him. There was something in Michael's posture, in the confident way he spoke on the phone, that caught his attention. "Yes, Mr. Morrison, I understand your concern. The meeting is scheduled for 3 p.m., but I must inform you of some critical changes in the contract terms that require an immediate conversation. We need to resolve this before you arrive." Valois slowly approached the desk, his expression changing from confusion to absolute astonishment. "How? Who are you? You sound very young, but you understand these documents better than most of my executives." "My name is Michael Sullivan, sir. And yes, I'm young, but I've been studying these contracts for months." "Months?" Valois whispered, loud enough for Michael to hear. Michael covered the phone with his hand and looked directly into the CEO's eyes. "Mr. Valois, every night for a year I've been reading the documents you leave on your desk. While my mother cleaned, I studied your contracts, your financial projections, your negotiation strategies. The revelation fell upon the office like a bomb. Your mother." Valois looked towards Clara, who remained paralyzed next to her box of cleaning supplies. "Yes," Michael replied, his voice gaining strength. "My mother is Clara Sullivan, the woman you just allowed to be fired for an invisible smudge on a desk. The woman who has cleaned your office for 12 years while I secretly read every important document in this company." The silence was deafening. Morrison was still waiting on the line. "Hello, are you still there?" Michael uncovered the phone. "Yes, Mr. Morrison, I'm here, and I have a proposal that will save both companies millions of dollars." "I'm listening," Morrison replied, clearly intrigued. "The merger clause in Section 8.3 has a loophole that neither company has noticed. If we restructure the payment terms and adjust the distribution of responsibilities, we can reduce operational costs by 40% and increase profit margins for both parties by 60%. There was a silence on the line. Then, Morrison spoke with an incredulous voice. "Young man, What you just described, my team of lawyers missed that completely. How did you? Because I've been studying corporate law on my own for 3 years, Michael interrupted. While my mother worked to pay for my engineering studies, I've been preparing myself for this moment without even knowing it. Valois sank into a chair, completely overwhelmed. Michael, how old are you? 18, sir, and my mother doesn't deserve to be treated the way you all have treated her for all these years. Clara finally reacted, tears streaming down her cheeks. But this time they were not tears of humiliation. They were of pure pride, of astonishment, of maternal love, exploding in her chest like fireworks. Mr. Ixo, Santos, Morrison continued from New York. I've been in business for 30 years and never heard someone your age analyze a contract with that level of sophistication. Can you be in this meeting in 2 hours? Michael looked at his mother, then at Galloway, who had gone completely mute, then at Valois. Yes, I can be there, but I have a condition. Name it. My mother stays with a pay raise and a public apology from Mr. Galloway. The employees who had been watching began to murmur among themselves, some smiling, others clearly impacted by what they had just witnessed. Morrison laughed from New York. I don't know what kind of family drama is happening there. A Harvard-educated lawyer missed a loophole. You can ask for whatever. Deal. Valois slowly stood up and walked towards Clara in front of the entire office. In front of all the employees who had witnessed her humiliation minutes earlier, he extended his hand to her. Miss Sullivan, he said with a clear voice, would you forgive me for having been so blind all these years? Clara took his hand with trembling fingers. Of course, Mr. Valois, but Michael wasn't finished. Mr. Morrison, he said into the phone. Is there anything else you need to know before the meeting? Something I discovered in the confidential files that could completely change the structure of this contract. What is it? Michael opened a folder that had been on Valois' desk. Inside were documents he had been studying for weeks, but there was also something he had never seen before. A photograph that chilled his blood. It was his mother, but 20 years younger. She was sitting in an elegant office, dressed in an executive suit, shaking hands with a young man whom Michael immediately recognized. James Morrison, 20 years younger, but definitely him. And on the back of the photograph, in his mother's handwriting, was written, Project Atlas, co-founders Clara Sullivan and James Morrison, 1998. Michael looked up at his mother, who had seen the photograph from where she stood. Clara's eyes were wide, her face pale as death. Mom, Michael whispered. Who are you, really? The photograph fell from Michael's hands as if it burned. The sound of the paper hitting the floor resonated in the absolute silence that had settled in Northwood Corporate Towers office. Clara Sullivan. James Morrison's voice from the speaker sounded broken, incredulous. Are you there? All eyes fixed on Clara, who remained motionless next to her box of cleaning supplies, like a pillar of salt. Her lips trembled, but no sound came from her throat. Do you know each other? Edward Valois asked, his voice barely a whisper. Michael picked up the photograph with trembling hands. Mom, I need you to explain this to me now. Mr. Morrison, Michael spoke into the phone, his voice laden with an emotion he couldn't control. It seems you've known my mother for a long time. Known her? Morrison chuckled bitterly from New York. Michael, your mother and I founded the company together, that is now called Morrison International Holdings. We were partners. We were everything. Clara finally found her voice. James, please. No. What, Clara? Morrison interrupted, his tone hardening. Don't tell your son the truth. Don't tell him you disappeared one night with all the Project Atlas documents and I never heard from you again. Manager Galloway, who had remained in shock since Michael demonstrated his knowledge, finally reacted. Project Atlas, Mr. Valois. That's the name of the contract we're negotiating with Morrison International. Valois approached Michael and snatched the photograph from his hands. He studied it carefully. Then he looked at Clara with an expression that mixed astonishment and understanding. Miss Sullivan, he said slowly, you developed the technology that Morrison International wants to license through us. Clara closed her eyes, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. I was young, I was brilliant, I was stupid. You weren't stupid, Morrison shouted from the phone. You were a genius. Your energy optimization algorithms revolutionized the entire industry. Do you know how many millions of dollars your work has generated over these 20 years? Michael felt the world spinning around him. Mom, you created something important. Why did you never tell me anything? Clara opened her eyes and looked at her son with a mix of love and pain that broke the hearts of everyone present. Because I wanted to protect you, my son. Because the business world is cruel, and I I made terrible mistakes. What kind of mistakes? Valois asked, clearly trying to understand the situation. She stole the documents, Morrison replied coldly. One night, Clara took all the blueprints, all the formulas, all the contracts, and disappeared. She left me ruined, with millions in debt, and a company on the verge of bankruptcy. That's not true, Clara shouted for the first time in 12 years, surprising everyone with the strength of her voice. James, you know that's not true. The silence that followed was tense, electric. Then tell us the truth, Mom, Michael said, his voice trembling between rage and desperation. Tell us what really happened. Clara looked around the office. All the employees were still there, watching as if it were a soap opera. Valois had unknowingly cancelled all his meetings. Even the security staff had moved closer to listen. James. Clara spoke directly into the speaker. Tell them why I really left. Tell them what you did to me. Clara, don't do this, Morrison warned. Tell them, she screamed, her voice echoing through the office. Tell them that when you found out I was pregnant, you told me I had to choose between my baby and my career. The impact of those words was like an explosion. Michael staggered, grabbing the desk to keep from falling. Pregnant, he whispered. Clara turned to him, her face soaked with tears. Yes, my son, pregnant with you. And your father told me that a baby would ruin everything, that we would have to give you up for adoption or that I should leave forever. Morrison remained silent on the line. So I left, Clara continued, her voice gaining strength. I took the documents because, legally, they belonged to me as much as to him. I had a right to half of everything we had created together. But instead of fighting, instead of claiming what was mine, I decided to disappear to raise you in peace. Michael collapsed into a chair, his world completely shattered. Morrison International Holdings is partially yours. It was mine, Clara corrected. I gave up everything for you, my son. I preferred to be invisible. I preferred to clean offices. I preferred to be humiliated every day rather than fight for money while you needed a mother. Clara. Morrison's voice finally returned, but now it sounded different, broken. I didn't know what. Didn't know what? Clara interrupted. Didn't you know I gave up a fortune to raise our son? Didn't you know that for 20 years I've been working from dawn to dusk to pay for his studies? Our son, Morrison shouted from New York. The silence that followed was absolute. Not even the air conditioning could be heard. Michael slowly looked up, staring at his mother with eyes that seemed to have aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Morrison is? He couldn't finish the question. Clara nodded, tears falling like waterfalls. James Morrison is your father, Michael. The revelation exploded in the office like a nuclear bomb. Employees began to murmur among themselves, some covering their mouths, others pulling out their phones to record the historic moment they were witnessing. Valois sank into his executive chair, completely overwhelmed. This is impossible, Michael. Morrison spoke from New York, his voice trembling. Son, are you there? Michael looked at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. You abandoned my mother when you found out she was pregnant. I didn't know she had decided to have you, Morrison responded desperately. I thought she had chosen. I thought she had decided not to. Not to what? Michael shouted, standing up with a fury that surprised everyone. You thought I wasn't going to be born. Michael, I was young. I was ambitious. I was an idiot, Morrison pleaded. I thought a baby would ruin our professional dreams. Your dreams, Clara corrected with a cold voice. You never cared about mine. Michael walked to the window overlooking the city. Below, thousands of people walked the streets living their normal lives, unaware that on the 18th floor of that building, a drama was unfolding that would change several lives forever. Mr. Morrison, Michael spoke without turning around. You called today to save a multi-million-dollar contract. Yes, but now that doesn't matter, Michael. Now all that matters is that… No, Michael interrupted, turning towards the phone. The contract does matter, because now I understand exactly what's going on. Valois leaned forward. What do you mean? Michael picked up the Project Atlas folder that had been on the desk. The algorithm that Morrison International wants to license through Northwood Corporate Towers is my mother's work from 20 years ago. Exactly, Morrison confirmed. But my mother never signed any document ceding her rights to that technology. Michael continued, his voice becoming colder and more calculating. So, legally, Morrison International has been making millions of dollars for 2 decades with technology that doesn't completely belong to them. The silence was total. Michael, he's right, Valois whispered, frantically reviewing documents. If Clara Sullivan was a co-founder and never formally relinquished her rights, my God, this could be the biggest legal case of the century. Michael approached the phone, his voice now completely controlled, cold as ice. Mr. Morrison, "Dad, I have a new proposal for you." "I'm listening," Morrison replied with a trembling voice. "My mother is going to sue Morrison International Holdings for 20 years of unpaid royalties. According to my calculations, considering interest and damages, we're talking about approximately $500 million. The employee still watching the scene gasped. Valois grabbed the desk to keep from falling. "Michael, you can't," Morrison began. "Or what?" Michael interrupted. "Are you going to abandon me again? The difference is that now I know exactly who I am and what I'm worth, and my mother knows it too." Clara looked at her son with a mixture of pride and terror. "My son, you don't have to do this for me." Michael approached her and took her hands, those hands that had cleaned offices for 12 years to pay for his studies. "Mom, for 20 years you've been invisible to the world. It's time for the world to see you." He turned to Valois. "Mr. Valois, do you want to be part of the solution or part of the problem?" Valois looked at him with a mixture of admiration and terror. "What do you propose?" "Simple. Northwood Corporate Towers will legally represent my mother in the lawsuit against Morrison International. In return, when we win, my mother will become a minority partner in this company, and I will become your Vice President of Technology Development." "Michael," Morrison shouted from New York. "You can't destroy everything I've built." Michael smiled for the first time all day, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the cold smile of someone who had just discovered his true power. "Dad," he said the word as if it were poison. "You destroyed our family 20 years ago. Now it's my turn to build something new." And then, to everyone's surprise, including himself, Michael hung up the phone. The silence that followed was deafening until Clara began to laugh. It wasn't a hysterical laugh. It was a liberating laugh. The laugh of someone who, after 20 years of humiliation, had finally regained her dignity. "My son," she said between laughs and tears, "I think you just declared war." Michael hugged her, feeling for the first time in his life that he had the power to change not only his destiny, but his mother's too. "Mom," he whispered in her ear, "the war has already begun. Now we're going to win it." But what neither of them knew was that James Morrison had already hung up his phone in New York and was dialing another number, a number Michael would never have expected. And the person who answered that call had the power to change the whole game once more. The office phone rang again exactly 3 minutes after Michael hung up. This time, no one moved to answer it. The sound echoed like a warning in the tense silence that had been lingering in the air of Northwood Corporate Towers. Ring, ring, ring. Michael looked at his mother, who was still trembling in his arms. Clara had stopped crying, but her eyes were still bright with a heartbreaking mixture of terror and hope. "Don't answer," Clara whispered. "James, when he gets angry, he's dangerous." But Valois had already picked up the phone. "Morrison?" "No, Mr. Valois." The voice that came from the speaker was female, young, with a refined accent. "I'm Elena Valois, your daughter." Edward paled instantly. "Elena, what are you doing calling the office? How did you get this number?" "Dad, I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you." Elena continued, ignoring his questions. "I'm here in New York, in James Morrison's office, and he just told me a very interesting story about a certain Clara Sullivan and her son Michael." Clara covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes filling with horror. "No, no, no. Elena, what the hell are you doing in New York?" Valois roared, but his voice trembled more with fear than with rage. "Dad, sit down. This is going to be hard to hear." All the employees who had been watching the scene moved closer. It was like an invisible magnet drawing them towards the drama unfolding before their eyes. 6 months ago, Elena began, her voice clear and calculating. "When Northwood Corporate Towers started having financial problems, you told me you had found a miracle investor who could save us. James Morrison, of Morrison International Holdings." "Yes, and thank God for that," Valois responded. But there was something in his tone that didn't sound convincing. "What you didn't tell me, Dad, is that Morrison didn't want to invest in us. He wanted to buy the entire company, and you promised him you would sell it in secret, without consulting with the other partners, without consulting with me." Michael felt his blood run cold. "Mr. Valois." Edward avoided Michael's gaze. "Elena, that's a private conversation between Morrison and me, a conversation that included selling the jobs of hundreds of families," Elena interrupted, her voice rising in volume. "Dad, Morrison showed me all the documents. You were going to close Northwood Corporate Towers next week and lay off all the employees." The murmurs of the workers turned into shouts of indignation. Robert Galloway, who had remained silent since his public humiliation, approached the desk, his face red with fury. "Mr. Valois, is that true?" Galloway demanded. "Elena, this is not the time or place. Valois tried to control the situation. "There is no time or place when it comes to destroying lives," Michael shouted, feeling a rage he didn't know he could possess. "You knew we were going to lose our jobs and still allowed my mother to be humiliated." Clara pulled away from Michael's arms, walking slowly towards Valois. When she spoke, her voice was so cold that it made everyone in the room shiver. "Edward," she said, using his first name for the first time in 12 years. "You knew Morrison was Michael's father when you planned this sale, didn't you?" He looked at her like a cornered animal. "Clara, I answer." Clara screamed with a force that made the window panes vibrate. "Answer if you knew that the man who was going to buy this company was the same man who abandoned me pregnant 20 years ago." The silence that followed was so profound that one could hear the beating of hearts. "Yes," Valois whispered finally. "Yes, I knew." The confession fell upon the office like an atomic bomb. Employees began to shout, some crying, others cursing. Clara staggered as if she had received a physical blow. "Dad," Elena continued from New York, her voice now laden with pain. "Morrison told me that you knew the whole story, that when he proposed buying the company, you told him it would be fun to have Clara working for him, without her knowing who her boss really was." Michael felt something inside him break. It wasn't just rage. It was something deeper, more primitive. It was the pain of seeing his mother betrayed, not once, but twice, by the same men who had the power to protect her. "Fun?" Michael repeated, his voice barely a deadly whisper. "It seemed fun to you, to watch my mother humiliate herself every day in front of the man who abandoned her." Valois recoiled, but Michael advanced towards him. "You turned my mother's life into a cruel joke for months. You knew exactly what you were doing. Michael, you have to understand that business sometimes requires business." Michael roared, hitting the desk so hard that all the documents jumped. "This wasn't business. This was torture." Clara slowly approached her son, placing a trembling hand on his arm. When she spoke, her voice was filled with a dignity that had been hidden for 20 years. "Gentlemen," she said, addressing all the employees who were still watching, "for 12 years, you have seen me clean these offices. You have seen me be invisible. You have seen me endure humiliations. You have seen me be less than human to some of you." The employees lowered their heads, some with tears in their eyes. "But what you didn't know," Clara continued, her voice gaining power with every word, "is that every chemical product I have used to clean these offices, every formula I have applied to keep this place impeccable, every process I have perfected to do my job better, is knowledge I learned when I was one of the most brilliant industrial chemists of my generation." Everyone's eyes widened. Every night, while Michael studied at the reception desk, I wasn't just cleaning, I was analyzing, I was observing, I was understanding exactly how every process in this company worked, because my brain never stopped being the brain of the scientist I used to be. Eleanor continued from New York as if she had been waiting for that moment. "Clara, Morrison showed me your original patents. You not only developed the energy optimization algorithm, you developed 17 different processes that have revolutionized 3 complete industries." Clara smiled for the first time that day, but it was a smile filled with power, not joy. "And all those processes are still legally mine, because I never relinquished my rights. I never signed any transfer documents." "What are you saying?" Valois asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. Michael took his mother's hand, feeling for the first time the true strength that had been hidden beneath years of feigned humiliation. "She's saying," Michael replied, "that Morrison International Holdings, and by extension you, Mr. Valois, have been illegally using patented technology for 2 decades. But there's something else too," Elena added from New York. "Clara, Morrison has all the original documents for Project Atlas, and according to what I've been able to review with the lawyers who are here, you not only have a right to royalties, you have a right to complete ownership of Morrison International Holdings." This revelation was like an earthquake. Even the employees who had been murmuring fell into absolute silence. "Complete ownership?" Clara whispered. "Yes," Elena confirmed. "Morrison never legally registered the company under his exclusive name. All the incorporation documents still show Clara Sullivan as a co-founder with equal rights. Legally, Morrison has been managing your company for 20 years without your consent." Clara sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she had just heard. "This means," Michael calculated quickly, "that my mother is not only the owner of half of Morrison International Holdings, but Morrison also owes her 20 years of unpaid executive salaries." "Correct," Elena confirmed. "We're talking about approximately $800 million. The figure resonated in the office like a sentence. $800 million. Clara Sullivan, the woman who had been cleaning offices by the hour, was technically one of the richest women in the country. But there's a problem, Elena continued, and her voice became more serious. Morrison isn't going to give anything up without a fight, and he has the resources to make this legal battle last decades. Michael looked at his mother, who was still in shock, then at Valois, who seemed to have aged 10 years in 10 minutes. What do you propose? Michael asked. Morrison wants to make a deal. He will recognize Clara's rights to 50% of the company, but in return, Clara has to sign a document waiving any claim for damages or back wages. How much money would that be? Clara asked with a trembling voice. 400 million, Elena replied. Immediate bank transfer today. Clara looked at Michael with eyes that seemed lost. My son, what do we do? But before Michael could answer, Robert Galloway approached the phone's microphone. Elena, this is Robert Galloway, operations manager, he said with a trembling voice. What about us? What about the employees of Northwood Corporate Towers if your father sells the company? Elena sighed audibly. Mr. Galloway, Morrison plans to close Northwood Corporate Towers completely. All of you will lose your jobs next week. Cries of desperation filled the office. Employees who had families, mortgages, children in university, suddenly faced immediate unemployment. Michael looked around, seeing the terror on the faces of people who had witnessed his transformation from the cleaner's invisible son to the heir of a multinational fortune. And it was at that moment that Michael Sullivan made the decision that would change not only his life and his mother's, but that of every person in that room. Elena, he said with a voice that sounded strangely calm, tell Morrison that my mother accepts the deal, but with an additional condition. Which one? Elena asked. Michael looked directly at Edward Valois, then at Robert Galloway, then at each of the employees who had humiliated his mother for years and who now depended on the decisions he was about to make. My mother is going to buy Northwood Corporate Towers immediately with her share of Morrison International Holdings. Clara looked at him with huge eyes. Michael, and when she owns it, Michael continued, I'm going to be the new CEO, and my first executive decision will be very simple. The silence in the office was so complete that one could hear the street traffic 18 floors below. Mr. Galloway, Michael addressed directly the man who had humiliated his mother hours earlier. You are fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you out. Galloway paled. Michael, I was just following orders. The same orders you followed when you decided to publicly humiliate my mother. Michael replied with a coldness that made several employees shiver. And Mr. Valois, you are also fired for treason, for conspiracy, and for turning my family's suffering into your personal entertainment. Valois stood up tremblingly. Michael, you can't do this. I already did, Michael responded. Security is coming up right now. And indeed, as if Michael had planned everything with military precision, the elevator doors opened and 3 security guards entered the office. Escort Mr. Valois and Mr. Valois. Galloway out of the building, Michael ordered with an authority no one questioned. As the 2 men who had controlled Clara's life for years were escorted out like criminals, Clara slowly stood up. Elena, she said towards the phone, tell Morrison I accept the deal, but I want all documents signed before midnight. Clara, Elena responded, there's something else you need to know. Morrison isn't alone in New York. He brought his lawyers, but he also brought someone else, someone who says they know you very well. Clara frowned. Who? Your sister, Patricia Sullivan. Clara's world completely stopped. That's impossible, she whispered. Patricia died in an accident 15 years ago. No, Clara. Patricia has been working for Morrison all this time. She was the one who told him where to find you. The final revelation hit Clara like a tsunami. She staggered, and Michael held her just before she fell. But what neither of them knew was that Patricia Sullivan hadn't come alone to New York, and the person accompanying her had information that could destroy everything Michael had just built in the last 30 minutes. Clara Sullivan completely collapsed in Michael's arms. It wasn't a faint, it was something worse. It was the total collapse of a woman who had just discovered that the last 15 years of mourning for her sister had been a cruel lie. Patricia is alive, Clara whispered, her voice broken like glass. Patricia has been alive all this time. Elena responded from New York with a softness that brutally contrasted with the information she was revealing. Clara, Patricia is here with me. Morrison says she has been helping him locate you for years. She wants to talk to you. Michael felt his mother trembling uncontrollably in his arms. The employees still in the office had gone completely mute, witnesses to a family drama that surpassed any soap opera they had ever seen. No, Clara managed to say, finding strength from somewhere deep in her soul. I don't want to talk to her. Not now. Clara. A new voice came from the speaker. A female voice, older, with the same accent as Clara, but hardened by years of secrets. Sister, I know you're angry, but you need to hear the truth. The impact of hearing Patricia's voice after 15 years was like an electric shock. Clara straightened abruptly, her eyes filling with a mixture of love, betrayal, and fury that Michael had never seen before. The truth? Clara laughed, but it was a bitter laugh, full of pain. Patricia, what truth? The truth that you faked your death. The truth that you left me crying over your empty grave for 15 years? Clara, it wasn't like that. Then tell me. Clara screamed with such force that the windows seemed to vibrate. Tell me how it was. Tell me why your sister, the only family I had left after Morrison abandoned me, decided to disappear and leave me completely alone. Michael watched his mother with a mixture of admiration and terror. This strong woman, this warrior, emerging from years of forced silence, was someone he had never known. Patricia was silent for long seconds before responding. Because Morrison offered me something you could never give me. What? Clara asked, though her tone suggested she feared the answer. Revenge. Patricia responded coldly. Revenge against the sister who was always smarter, more successful, more loved by our parents. Revenge against Clara Sullivan, the genius who could have anything while I could barely hold a job. The silence that followed was so profound that Michael could hear his own heartbeat. Patricia, Clara whispered. I never knew you felt that way. Of course, you didn't know, Patricia continued, her voice becoming more cruel. You were too busy being perfect. Too busy building corporate empires with your millionaire boyfriend to notice that your older sister was drowning in debt and failures. Michael felt a growing rage towards this woman he didn't know, but who was tearing his mother apart in front of his eyes. Ma'am, you have no right, I have no right. Patricia interrupted him. Young man, I have every right in the world, because for 15 years I've been collecting information about your mother that could destroy everything you just won. Clara looked up abruptly. What information, Morrison? Patricia called. Show him the documents. James Morrison's voice returned to the phone, but now it sounded different, more calculating, colder. Clara, Patricia brought me something very interesting 15 years ago. Something you thought you had destroyed forever. What are you talking about? Clara asked, but there was terror in her voice. The real Project Atlas documents, Morrison responded. Not the copies you took when you disappeared, the originals. The documents that show that 80% of the work was developed by my team, not by you. Michael felt his world begin to tremble again. What is he saying? Elena intervened, her voice filled with pain by what she was about to reveal. Michael, the documents Patricia gave Morrison 15 years ago show that Clara only contributed 20% to the development of Project Atlas. That's a lie, Clara screamed, standing up with renewed fury. Patricia, you know that's a lie. You were there. You saw how I worked day and night for 2 years. I was there, Patricia confirmed. And that's why I know exactly how much work you did and how much work you pretended to do. Clara, you were always brilliant at taking credit for other people's work. The Northwood Corporate Towers employees watched the exchange as if they were watching a horror movie. Some had discreetly started filming with their phones. Michael looked at his mother, searching her eyes for any sign that this was a cruel lie from Patricia, but what he saw terrified him. There was doubt in Clara's eyes. There was guilt. Mom, Michael whispered, tell me it's not true. Clara looked at him with tears streaming down her cheeks. Michael, things are not always as simple as they seem. What does that mean? Michael asked, feeling something fundamental breaking inside him. It means, Morrison interrupted from New York, that your mother is not the hero you think she is. Clara specialized in taking ideas from other researchers, modifying them slightly, and presenting them as her own. That's not true, Clara shouted, but her voice didn't sound as convincing as before. Oh no? Patricia laughed cruelly. Do you want me to tell your son about Dr. Frederick Carlson, the researcher whose work you stole to create your famous energy optimization algorithms? Michael felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Mom. Clara closed her eyes, tears falling freely. Dr. Carlson was my mentor at university. He had developed the theoretical foundations of the algorithms, but he didn't know how to apply them commercially. And you did it for him? Michael asked with desperate hope. Clara opened her eyes and looked at her son with infinite sadness. No, my son. I took his work and registered it under my name while he was on medical leave. When he returned, it was already too late. The patents were mine. Michael's world completely collapsed. The woman he had admired all his life, the mother who had sacrificed everything for him, had just confessed that she had built her career by stealing the work of others. But there's more, Patricia continued relentlessly. Do you want to know why Morrison really abandoned you, Clara? It wasn't because you were pregnant. It was because he discovered you had been stealing research from 3 different universities and selling it as your own. Clara sank into her chair, completely defeated. Patricia, please, don't, no. Michael interrupted, his voice strangely calm. Continue. I want to hear everything. Patricia seemed to enjoy every word that came out of her mouth. Your mother, Michael, wasn't a genius. She was a very clever thief, and when Morrison found out, he told her she had to choose, confess publicly or disappear forever. So she chose to disappear. But she took all the original documents, including proof of her fraud, to make sure Morrison could never expose her. Michael looked at his mother, who had hidden her face in her hands. Mom, is that why you really cleaned offices? It wasn't sacrifice, it was penitence. Clara looked up, and Michael saw in her eyes 20 years of genuine guilt, shame, and remorse. At first, yes, I thought that if I punished myself enough, if I made myself invisible enough, somehow I could atone for what I had done. And after? Michael asked. Clara looked at him with pure love, without the layers of secrets and lies that had enveloped their relationship for years. After, I had you. And then my punishment became my purpose. Every day I worked, every humiliation I endured, was to give you a better life than I deserved to have. Michael felt a strange peace descending upon him. It was as if he could finally see his mother as a complete human being, not as a saint or a villain, but as a person who had made terrible mistakes and had spent 20 years trying to make amends. Patricia, Michael spoke towards the phone. What exactly do you want? I want Clara to give up any claim to Morrison International Holdings, Patricia responded. I want her to publicly admit that her contribution to Project Atlas was minimal, and I want her to pay me 15 years of lost wages that I lost when I had to fake my death to escape the scandal she had caused. And if she doesn't, Michael asked, then I publish all the documents. Clara's career will be destroyed, your reputation too, and Morrison International Holdings will sue for fraud. Clara could go to prison. Michael looked around the office. The employees were still there, now completely silent, witnesses to the disintegration of the heroic story they had witnessed hours earlier. How much money? Michael finally asked. $50 million, Patricia responded without hesitation. Immediate, Michael quickly calculated. If his mother gave up her rights to Morrison International Holdings, they would lose $400 million. If she didn't, they would lose everything, and Clara might go to prison. But then Michael remembered something he had learned during all those years, studying contracts at Valois' desk. Patricia, he said with a smile that surprised everyone, I have a counterproposal. Which one? Patricia asked suspiciously. Michael walked to the file, where Valois kept the most confidential documents. He knew exactly what he was looking for. The statute of limitations for academic fraud in the province of Ontario, where my mother committed those crimes, is 15 years, Michael announced, pulling a law book from the file. And according to my calculations, it's been exactly 15 years and 2 months since my mother registered the last patents under her name. The silence on both sides of the phone was absolute. Which means, Michael continued, that legally, they can no longer prosecute my mother for those crimes. The time has run out. Clara looked at him with absolute astonishment. Michael. And more importantly, Michael added, according to intellectual property laws that have changed in the last 20 years, any work derived from previous research becomes the legitimate property of the developer after 20 years of successful commercial use. Morrison finally spoke, his voice trembling. What are you saying? Michael smiled, and for the first time in his life, he felt like the genius he had inherited from his mother. I'm saying that my mother may have started as a thief, but 20 years of continuous development and improvements have made her the legitimate owner of that technology. And then Michael played his final card. And Patricia, dear aunt, the fact that you have been hiding evidence for 15 years makes you an accomplice after the fact, which, according to federal law, is a crime that has not yet prescribed. The phone line went completely silent. Michael looked at his mother with a mixture of love, disappointment, and renewed respect. Mom, you made terrible mistakes, but you spent 20 years paying for them, and I'm going to make sure you get the forgiveness you deserve. The silence that followed Michael's legal revelation lasted exactly 47 seconds. 47 seconds during which the fate of 3 families, a multinational company, and hundreds of jobs hung in the air like a glass sword. When Patricia finally spoke, her voice had lost all its previous cruelty. Now it sounded like what she really was, an older, tired woman who had carried 15 years of hatred and finally realized she had been manipulated. Michael, she said softly. You really know the laws that well. Michael looked at his mother, who was watching him with a mixture of pride and terror. Aunt Patricia, for 4 years I've been studying not only engineering but also corporate law. Every night, while Mom cleaned, I studied legal cases, judicial precedents, statutes of limitations. I prepared for this day without even knowing it. What day? Clara asked, confused. Michael approached her, taking her hands, calloused by years of cleaning. The day I would have to defend you, Mom. Deep in my heart, I always knew there were secrets. I always knew that a woman as intelligent as you wouldn't be cleaning offices unless she was hiding something. The Northwood Corporate Towers employees had moved closer, forming a circle around Michael and Clara. They were no longer just observers. They had become witnesses to something they knew would change their lives. But Michael, Elena intervened from New York. Even if the crimes have prescribed, that doesn't mean Clara has a right to ownership of Morrison International Holdings. Michael smiled, and this time it was a smile filled with a confidence that surprised even his mother. Elena, do you have access to Morrison International's legal files right now? Yes. Why? Look for the file marked Original Incorporation, Project Atlas, 1998. Specifically, look for the page with the co-founders' signatures. There was the sound of papers rustling, computer clicks, and then Elena shouted with astonishment. My God, what's happening? Morrison demanded. Elena continued, her voice full of disbelief. Dad, Morrison never signed as the sole owner of the company. All the incorporation documents show Clara Sullivan as the owner of 51%. The impact of this revelation was like an earthquake. Clara covered her mouth with her hands. Morrison began to shout in English, and Patricia fell completely silent. 51%? Clara whispered, but I thought it was 50/50. Michael quickly reviewed the documents he had found in Valois's file. Mom, according to these contracts, Morrison ceded you an additional 1% when he found out about your pregnancy. It says here that it was his way of ensuring the baby would have a majority stake in the company if anything happened to him. Morrison finally spoke, his voice broken. I had forgotten that detail. It was an emotional decision. I thought Clara had decided. I thought it no longer mattered. What does that mean? Clara asked, though her expression suggested she was beginning to understand. Michael looked at her with tears in his eyes. But these were not tears of sadness. They were tears of pure justice, of divine vindication. It means that you are not the co-owner of Morrison International Holdings, Mom. You are the majority owner. You are the boss. The Northwood Corporate Towers employees began to applaud. It was a spontaneous applause, filled with genuine emotion for the woman who had cleaned their offices for years and who was now becoming one of the most powerful executives in the country. But Clara wasn't celebrating. She had stood up and was walking to the window, looking at the city as if seeing it for the first time. Patricia, she said finally, why? Why did you really do this? It can't have been just out of jealousy. Patricia was silent for long moments before responding, and when she did, her voice was filled with a pain that had been hidden for decades. Because when Mom and Dad died in that accident, you inherited everything. The house, the savings, the life insurance, everything. And I inherited nothing because I had been a disappointment all my life. Clara turned abruptly. Patricia, you renounced your inheritance. You said you didn't want anything to do with the family after the funeral. Because I was 18 and I was an idiot, Patricia cried, her composure finally breaking. And you never looked for me. You never tried to convince me to come back. Michael watched this exchange between sisters with an understanding that went beyond his years. It was the pain of a broken family, multiplied by decades of misunderstandings and wounded pride. Patricia, Clara said softly, I looked for you for 5 years. I looked for you. I hired private investigators. I put ads in newspapers. I called every hospital and shelter in 3 provinces. What? Patricia whispered. Clara returned to the phone, her voice now filled with a tenderness Michael had rarely heard. Sister, I only stopped looking for you when Morrison told me you had died in a car accident in Alberta. He showed me a police report, a death certificate, photos of the accident. The silence that followed was so profound that Michael could hear his own breathing. He lied to you? Patricia asked with a broken voice. Patricia, Morrison finally spoke, and for the first time since this conversation began, his voice sounded ashamed. I needed your help to find Clara, and the only way to get your cooperation was to convince you that she hadn't looked for you after you disappeared. You faked my death? Patricia cried. I hired someone to create convincing documents. Clara cried for weeks. It was then that I decided to stop looking for her. I thought she had suffered enough. Michael felt a rage so intense that he had to grip the desk to keep from losing control. You made my mother believe that her sister had died, so you could use her sister to find her. Michael, I was desperate, Morrison began. No, Michael roared with a force that made the windows vibrate. There's no excuse for that. You destroyed 2 lives, separated 2 sisters, and caused 20 years of unnecessary pain for your wounded ego. Clara approached the phone, and when she spoke, her voice had an authority Michael had never heard before. It was the voice of the CEO of a multinational company, the voice of the powerful woman who had been hidden for 2 decades. James Morrison, she said, using his full name as if it were a sentence. As majority owner of Morrison International Holdings, I have some decisions to announce. Clara, please, Morrison pleaded. First decision. Clara continued relentlessly. You are officially fired as CEO. Effective immediately. The Northwood Corporate Towers employees began to murmur with excitement. They were witnessing corporate history in real time. Second decision, Clara continued. Patricia Sullivan will be contacted immediately by the company's legal department to discuss compensation for the 15 years of manipulation and psychological abuse she suffered. Michael heard sobs from the other end of the line. Patricia was crying. Third decision, Clara added. Elena Valois will be appointed as the new president of operations of Morrison International Holdings, reporting directly to me. Clara, Elena asked with astonishment. You are the only person in this situation who has acted with complete integrity, Clara explained. You revealed your father's conspiracy, protected the interests of the employees, and showed true leadership when it mattered. Michael looked at his mother with renewed admiration. This woman, who had spent years being invisible, was now making decisions that would affect thousands of people with the wisdom of someone who had learned about leadership from the lowest trenches. And my final decision, Clara said, her voice now soft but firm. Patricia, my sister, I want you to come home. I want you to properly meet your nephew. I want us to reclaim the 20 years we lost because of the lies of a man who didn't deserve either of our love. Patricia's sobs intensified. Clara, do you forgive me? Clara closed her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. Patricia, I also made terrible mistakes. I stole, I lied, I hurt innocent people. If you can forgive a sister who ruined her life for pride and ambition, I can forgive a sister who ruined hers for pain and abandonment. Michael approached his mother and hugged her. It was a hug that contained all the love, all the forgiveness, and all the hope of a family that had finally found the truth after decades of secrets. Mom, he whispered in her ear, I'm proud of you. Not for the money, not for the power, but for choosing love over revenge. Clara hugged him back, and Michael could feel years of tension fading from her body. My son, I learned something during these years cleaning offices. I learned that true power doesn't come from what you have, but from what you are willing to give. From New York, Elena spoke with a voice filled with emotion. Clara, what's going to happen to Northwood Corporate Towers? Are you still going to buy it? Clara looked around the office at the employees who had seen her transform from invisible cleaner to business magnate in a single afternoon. No, she finally responded. I'm going to do something better. I'm going to give it to its employees. Northwood Corporate Towers will become a worker-owned cooperative, and Michael will be its first president, elected by democratic vote. The roar of approval that followed was deafening. Employees shouted, cried, embraced each other. It was the victory of the common worker over the corporate system that had treated them as disposable. But the biggest surprise was yet to come, because at that moment the elevator doors opened, and an older woman with gray hair and Clara's same green eyes walked into the office. Patricia Sullivan had taken the first flight from New York, and behind her came someone who would make this entire redemption story take a turn no one had anticipated. Patricia Sullivan walked into Northwood Corporate Towers' office with hesitant steps, as if each meter she advanced took her 20 years back in time. Her green eyes, identical to Clara's, were swollen from crying during the 6-hour flight from New York. But the real surprise wasn't Patricia. The real surprise was the man walking behind her, tall, distinguished, with completely white hair and an expression that mixed nervousness with determination. Michael immediately recognized him from the photographs he had seen on the internet during his nightly investigations. Dr. Frederick Carlson, the man whose work his mother had stolen 20 years ago. My God, Clara whispered, bringing her hands to her chest as if she had seen a ghost. Frederick, what are you doing here? Dr. Carlson stopped at the office entrance, looking around with scientific curiosity, until his eyes fixed on Clara. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but laden with an emotion that had been contained for 2 decades. "Clara Sullivan," he said slowly. "Or should I say, Clara Sullivan Morrison, the new CEO of Morrison International Holdings." Michael felt his stomach contract. He had hoped the subject of Dr. Carlson would remain in the past, but here he was, walking into the center of their new reality, like a ticking time bomb. "Frederick," Clara began, her voice trembling. I know there are no words that can, no." Dr. Carlson interrupted her, raising a hand. "There are no words that can erase what happened, but there are also no words that can change what is going to happen now." Patricia slowly approached Clara, as if approaching a wounded animal. When she finally got close enough to touch her, she extended a trembling hand towards her sister's face. "Carmencita," she whispered, using the childhood nickname she hadn't spoken in 25 years. "My little sister, do you really forgive me?" Clara took Patricia's hand and pressed it against her cheek, tears streaming freely. "Patricia, I should be asking your forgiveness. I should have looked for you more. I should have been a better sister. I should—" "Shh." Patricia silenced her gently. "It no longer matters what we should have done, only what we are going to do now." The sisters hugged with an intensity that made several of the employees who were still watching the scene cry. It was the kind of hug that contains years of pain, forgiveness, and love that had never completely extinguished. Michael watched his mother and aunt with a mixture of joy and apprehension. The family reunion was beautiful, but Dr. Carlson's presence represented a threat he couldn't ignore. "Dr. Carlson," Michael approached the older man with respect, but caution. "May I ask what exactly brings you here?" Carlson looked at him with eyes that had seen too much of the world to be easily surprised. "You must be Michael. I've heard a lot about you in the last few hours." "From whom?" Michael asked. "From James Morrison," Carlson replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "He called me 3 hours ago, completely desperate. He told me the whole story, your legal brilliance, the discovery of the true ownership of the company, the family reunion, everything." Clara slowly separated from Patricia, turning towards Carlson with an expression of absolute terror. "Frederick, what exactly did Morrison tell you?" "He told me he needed my help to stop what he called the destruction of everything he had built," Carlson responded. "He offered me $50 million if I would publicly testify that your work had been completely based on my stolen research." The silence that followed was so dense that Michael could feel it pressing against his chest like a marble slab. "And?" Clara asked with a barely audible voice. "Are you going to do it?" Carlson slowly walked to the window, looking at the city as if searching for answers on the horizon. "Clara, when I discovered what you had done with my work 20 years ago, I thought my life was over. I had lost credit for 5 years of research. I had lost funding opportunities. I had lost my reputation in the scientific community." Michael felt his legs trembling. "Dr. Carlson, but something interesting happened," Carlson continued, ignoring the interruption. "Instead of becoming bitter, I decided to continue researching, and over these 20 years, I have developed technologies that have revolutionized 3 different fields of medicine." He turned to Clara with an expression Michael couldn't decipher. "Do you know what I've learned in these 20 years, Clara?" "What?" Clara whispered. "That true genius isn't in having original ideas. True genius is in taking existing ideas and taking them to places no one else could take them." Carlson approached her slowly. "And you, Clara Sullivan, took my basic algorithms to a level I never could have imagined." The employees watching began to murmur among themselves. This wasn't the destructive confrontation they had expected. "What you did was wrong," Carlson continued. "Stealing is wrong. Taking credit for other people's work is wrong. But what you created with that stolen foundation, that was extraordinary." Clara looked at him with complete confusion. "Frederick, I don't understand. Morrison showed me all the developments you've made based on my original algorithms," Carlson explained. "In 20 years, you've created 17 different applications. You've solved energy problems that are saving millions of lives. You've developed systems that are cleaning oceans and reducing atmospheric pollution." Michael felt a spark of hope in his chest. "What exactly are you saying, Dr. Carlson?" Carlson smiled, and this time the smile did reach his eyes. "I'm saying that I told Morrison he could keep his $50 million, that I prefer to be a recognized co-inventor of technologies that are saving the planet than to be the bitter scientist who destroyed the woman who turned his ideas into reality." The revelation hit the office like a ray of light after a storm. Employees began to applaud spontaneously. Patricia hugged Clara tighter, and Michael felt he could breathe for the first time in hours. "Frederick," Clara cried, "can you really forgive me?" "Clara, I am not one to forgive you," Carlson responded softly. But I am one to offer you a partnership, a real, legitimate partnership, where we work together to develop the next generations of these technologies. Michael approached Dr. Carlson with a reverence that surprised the older scientist. Dr. Carlson, would you be willing to be the Chief Scientific Officer of Morrison International Holdings under my mother's leadership? Carlson looked at Michael with an expression of genuine surprise. You want me to join you after what your mother did to me? I want you to join us precisely because of what my mother did to you. Michael responded with a wisdom that seemed to come from generations of experience. Because you have shown that true power doesn't come from revenge, but from forgiveness. And we need that kind of moral leadership. Clara looked at her son with eyes full of pride and astonishment. My son, how did you learn to be so wise? From you, Mom, Michael replied. I learned by watching how you spent 20 years paying for your mistakes without becoming bitter. I learned by watching how you chose humility over pride, sacrifice over selfishness. It was then that the office phone rang again. This time Michael didn't hesitate to answer it. Northwood Corporate Towers, Michael Sullivan speaking. Michael, Elena's voice from New York sounded urgent. I need you to put it on speakerphone immediately. Everyone needs to hear this. Michael activated the speakerphone. Go ahead, Elena. Morrison just did something that changes everything, Elena announced. He's called a press conference for 5 p.m. Eastern Time. He's going to publicly announce that Clara stole all of Morrison International Holdings technology. Clara covered her hands over her mouth. What? But that's not all, Elena continued. He's also going to announce that he's suing Clara for $500 million in damages and that he's going to seek her arrest for corporate fraud. Patricia approached the phone with fury. Can he do that legally, with the prescriptions Michael mentioned? Technically, he can't criminally prosecute her, Elena responded, but he can civilly sue her and publicly ruin her reputation. And with the media involved, it could be devastating for any attempt by Clara to run the company. Michael felt a familiar rage growing in his chest. What time is that conference? In 45 minutes, Elena responded. Michael looked at the office clock. 4:15 p.m. Then he looked at his mother, who seemed to have shrunk at the prospect of being publicly humiliated in front of the entire country. Elena, Michael said with a voice that everyone in the office recognized as the voice of leadership. I need you to do exactly what I'm going to tell you. I'm listening. Book the largest conference hall you can find in Manhattan for 6 p.m. Summon all the major media outlets, CNN, Fox, NBC, everyone. What for? Elena asked. Michael looked at his mother, then at Dr. Carlson, then at Patricia. We're going to have our own press conference, and we're going to tell our version of the story. Clara looked at him with terror. Michael, I can't face the media, not after everything I've done. Mom, Michael took her hands. For 20 years you've lived in the shadows, paying for your mistakes. It's time for you to come into the light and show what you've built with those mistakes. Dr. Carlson approached them. Clara, Michael is right. The story Morrison is going to tell is the story of a thief who never changed. But the real story is that of a woman who made terrible mistakes and spent 2 decades turning them into something beautiful. Patricia hugged her sister's shoulders. Carmencita, I'll be there with you. We'll face this together, as we should have 20 years ago. Michael looked around the office, seeing the faces of the employees who had witnessed the most incredible transformation they would ever see. All of you, he said, addressing the Northwood Corporate Towers workers. Would you be willing to accompany us to New York tonight? Would you be willing to defend the woman who cleaned your offices and who now wants to make you owners of your own company? The roar of approval that followed was deafening. These employees, who had seen Clara humiliated in the morning and become a CEO in the afternoon, were ready to follow her to the ends of the earth. Elena, Michael continued, I also need you to contact all the beneficiaries of the technologies my mother developed in the last 20 years, the hospitals that use her water purification systems, the cities that implemented her pollution reduction programs, the companies that adopted her energy optimization processes. What for? Elena asked. Because Morrison is going to try to paint my mother as a villain, Michael explained. But we are going to show the world that this villain has saved more lives in 20 years than most people in their entire existence. Clara looked at her son with tears streaming down her cheeks, but this time they were not tears of sadness or shame. They were tears of pure hope. My son, she whispered, do you really think we can win this battle? Michael looked at her with a smile that combined his youth with a wisdom that seemed ancient. Mom, we're not going to win this battle. We already won it. Now we're just going to tell the world how we did it. But what Michael didn't know was that Morrison had an ace up his sleeve, an ace he had been holding for 20 years, waiting for the perfect moment to use it. And that perfect moment had arrived, because during the press conference that was about to begin, Morrison was not only going to reveal Clara's past crimes, he was going to reveal a secret about Michael that would change everything the young man had believed about his own identity. A secret Clara had kept for 18 years, and one that could destroy not only their mother-son relationship, but all the trust Michael had placed in the woman who had sacrificed everything for him. The phone rang once more, and this time the voice that came from the speaker wasn't Elena's, it was James Morrison's, and it sounded like a man who had finally decided to play dirty. "Clara," he said with a coldness that chilled everyone's blood in the office, "I hope you're enjoying your last day as Michael Sullivan's mother, because after what I'm going to reveal in 30 minutes, it's very possible he'll never want to see you again." Morrison's threat resonated in the Northwood Corporate Towers office like the roar of a wounded lion. Clara physically staggered, grabbing the desk to keep from falling, while Michael looked at her with a mixture of confusion and growing terror. "Mom," Michael whispered. "What is he talking about?" Clara closed her eyes, and for a moment it seemed she was going to faint. When she opened them again, there was a heartbreaking resignation in them. "Michael," she said with a trembling voice, "there's something I never told you, something that would change everything between us." "Clara, no." Patricia intervened desperately. "Don't give him that satisfaction. Don't let Morrison use your love for Michael against you." But Morrison continued from the speaker, his voice laden with a cruelty that had been contained for decades. "Clara, are you going to tell Michael the truth, or would you prefer him to find out on national television, along with the rest of the world?" Michael felt something fundamental break inside his chest. "Mom, what truth?" Clara looked around the office, seeing the faces of the employees who had admired her for the last few hours, of Dr. Carlson, who had just offered her forgiveness, of Patricia, who had returned after 15 years. All those people who finally saw her as a complex, but valuable, human being were about to discover the secret she had guarded more jealously than any other. "Morrison isn't your biological father," Clara whispered so low that Michael had to lean in to hear her. Michael's world stopped completely. "What? Your biological father is Frederick Carlson," Clara continued, tears streaming like rivers down her cheeks. "When I stole his work, I didn't just steal his research. I also stole his heart, his trust. And when I became pregnant, I made him believe the baby was Morrison's to protect you from the consequences of my crimes." Dr. Carlson froze, his face passing through a series of emotions ranging from shock to understanding and, finally, to an infinite tenderness as he looked at the young man he had been admiring for the last hour. "Frederick is Michael couldn't finish the question. Clara nodded, sobbing. "I told Morrison you were his because I thought a successful businessman could give you a better life than a ruined scientist. But when Morrison abandoned me, I realized I had lost the opportunity to give Frederick the chance to know his son." Michael looked at Dr. Carlson, searching for any resemblance he had never noticed before. And there they were, the same curious eyes, the same way of tilting his head when he thought, the same passion for solving complex problems. "Frederick," Clara addressed the scientist with a broken voice, "for 20 years, I stole from you not only your work but also your son. There is no forgiveness for that. There is no justification for that." Carlson slowly walked towards Michael, studying his face as if seeing a scientific miracle. "Michael," he said softly. "May I?" Michael didn't respond with words. He simply approached the man he had just discovered was his father and hugged him with an intensity that surprised them both. Morrison, observing that his emotional bomb had not had the destructive effect he expected, intensified his attack. "That's not all. Clara also lied to him about Patricia's death, about the motives for her crimes, about everything. Michael, your mother is a pathological liar who has manipulated your entire life." Michael slowly separated from Carlson and approached the phone. When he spoke, his voice had a deadly calm that made everyone in the office shiver. "Mr. Morrison," he said, "you have just made the biggest mistake of your life." "How?" Morrison laughed cruelly. "By telling your son the truth about what kind of woman you really are." "No," Michael responded. "By revealing to me that you knew all this time that you were not my biological father, and yet you abandoned me when my mother was pregnant." The silence that followed was so profound that one could hear the air conditioning. Michael continued, his voice gaining strength with every word. "You knew the baby wasn't yours, but you let my mother believe that you had abandoned her for being pregnant. You let her carry that guilt for 20 years while you knew the truth." Clara looked up, confused. "Michael, Mom." Michael turned to her. "Didn't it ever seem strange to you that Morrison so easily accepted that the baby was his?" Didn't you ever question why such a calculating man never asked for a paternity test? Clara frowned, processing the information. I thought he knew, Michael concluded. Morrison always knew I wasn't his son, but it suited him for you to believe I was, because that way he could control the narrative. He could paint himself as the man abandoned by a traitorous woman, when in reality, he was the one who orchestrated everything from the beginning. Patricia looked at the phone with renewed fury. James Morrison, you are more manipulative than I ever imagined. Elena intervened from New York, her voice filled with urgency. Michael, Morrison's press conference is starting in 10 minutes. The media is already broadcasting live from here. Michael looked around the office at his mother, who had sacrificed everything to protect him, at Frederick Carlson, his true father, who had chosen forgiveness over revenge, at Patricia, who had returned to heal family wounds, and at the employees of Northwood Corporate Towers, who were willing to support a woman who had cleaned their offices with dignity for years. Elena, Michael said with a determination that surprised even himself, cancel the conference hall reservation. What? Elena asked, confused. No, we're not going to New York, Michael announced. Morrison can have his press conference. We're going to do something better. Clara looked at him with perplexity. My son, what are you going to do? Michael smiled, and it was the smile of someone who had finally found his true power. We're going to broadcast live from right here, directly from the office where it all began, and we're going to tell the world the real story. He turned to one of the employees who had been filming with his phone. Can you set up a live stream on all major social media networks? Yes, of course, the employee responded, excited to be part of something historic. Dr. Carlson, Michael addressed his newly discovered father. Would you be willing to publicly explain how the work my mother stole became technologies that have saved millions of lives? Carlson smiled with paternal pride. It would be an honor. Patricia, Michael continued, could you talk about how Morrison manipulated your pain to separate you from your sister for 15 years? Patricia nodded, her face hardening with determination. Gladly. Michael looked at his mother, who was still paralyzed by the revelation that Morrison had known the truth all along. And Mom, you're going to do what Morrison least expects. What? Clara asked. You're going to thank him, Michael responded, publicly, in front of the whole world. Clara looked at him as if he had lost his mind. Michael, Mom, Morrison just gave you the greatest gift of your life, Michael explained. He freed you from 20 years of false guilt. He brought your sister back. He reunited you with your son's true father. And, more importantly, he showed you that you are stronger than you ever imagined. The live stream began exactly at 5:30 p.m., just as Morrison was starting his press conference in New York. In seconds, thousands of people connected to see what was happening in Northwood Corporate Towers office. Michael stood in front of the camera with Clara, Patricia, and Dr. Carlson by his side, and the employees forming a semicircle behind them. Good afternoon, Michael began, his voice clear and confident. My name is Michael Sullivan, and 12 hours ago I was just a cleaner's son. Now I am the son of an extraordinary woman who is about to tell you a story that James Morrison would prefer you never heard. On the split screen that users could see, Morrison spoke from an elegant podium surrounded by reporters, while Michael spoke from a common corporate office surrounded by real workers. Mr. Morrison is telling you that my mother is a thief, Michael continued. And they're right. 20 years ago, Clara Sullivan stole the work of other scientists and presented it as her own. Live comments began to appear, some supporting Morrison, others confused by Michael's brutal honesty. But what Morrison isn't telling you, Michael continued, is what my mother did with that stolen work over the next 20 years. Clara approached the camera, and when she spoke, her voice had the dignity of someone who had found peace with her past. I took Frederick Carlson's ideas and turned them into systems that have purified drinking water for 50 million people, Clara said. I developed processes that have reduced atmospheric pollution in 18 major cities. I created algorithms that have optimized energy consumption in thousands of hospitals, schools, and community centers. Dr. Carlson approached, placing a protective hand on Clara's shoulder. My name is Frederick Carlson, and I am the scientist whose work Clara stole 20 years ago. I am also Michael's biological father. Live comments exploded with surprise and emotion. For 20 years, I have watched as Clara took my basic ideas and brought them to levels I never could have reached, Carlson continued. As a scientist, I can tell you that true genius isn't in having original ideas. It's in taking existing ideas and transforming them into solutions that change the world. Patricia approached, her eyes shining with tears of redemption. I am Patricia Sullivan, Clara's sister. For 15 years, I believed my sister had abandoned me, Now I know that James Morrison faked my death to manipulate both of us and use us in his personal war against a woman who had the courage to rebuild her life after making terrible mistakes. In New York, Morrison could see the live stream on the reporters' screens. His press conference was falling apart as journalists began asking questions about the accusations being made in real time from Northwood Corporate Tower's office. Michael took the camera and walked through the office, showing the employees who had witnessed Clara's transformation. "These are the people who worked alongside my mother for years without knowing who she really was," Michael explained. "Today they saw her humiliated, fired, and then transformed into the CEO of a multinational company. But more importantly, they saw her choose to use her power not for revenge, but to empower others." He stopped in front of Robert Galloway, who had returned to the office after being escorted out hours earlier. "Mr. Galloway," Michael said, "you humiliated my mother this morning. What do you have to say now?" Galloway looked directly at the camera, his eyes filled with genuine tears. "Clara Sullivan taught me today that true leadership doesn't come from the power you have over others, but from the power you give to others. She humbled me without humiliating me, corrected me without destroying me, and forgave me without my deserving it." Michael returned to the center of the office, where Clara waited with a serenity she had been building for 20 years. "Mr. Morrison," Michael addressed the camera directly, "thank you. Thank you for teaching me that revenge is the refuge of the weak. Thank you for showing me that my mother is stronger than any man who has tried to control her. And thank you for proving to me that true power comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down." Clara approached the camera for her final statement. "James Morrison, for 20 years I thought I owed you an apology for betraying you. Now I understand that you owe me an apology for stealing 20 years of my life by living with false guilt." She paused, taking a deep breath. "But I don't need that apology, because those 20 years were not wasted. They were my education in humanity, humility, and resilience." Michael looked at the camera one last time. "Morrison International Holdings will officially become Sullivan Carlson Enterprises tomorrow morning. It will be a company dedicated to developing technologies that solve humanity's biggest problems, led by people who have learned that past mistakes can become the wisdom of the future." The broadcast ended with an image that would become iconic. Clara embraced by her son Michael, her sister Patricia, and Frederick Carlson, surrounded by employees who applauded not out of obligation, but out of genuine inspiration. In New York, Morrison abruptly canceled his press conference when reporters began asking him about the accusations of manipulation and emotional blackmail. Days later, Clara Sullivan Carlson became the youngest CEO to appear on the cover of Forbes, not for her wealth, but for demonstrating that redemption is possible when combined with hard work and genuine humility. Michael founded the country's first cooperative university, where students do not pay tuition, but contribute with community work and the development of social technologies. Frederick Carlson finally received the recognition he deserved for his scientific contributions and became co-director of the most advanced innovation lab in the Western Hemisphere. Patricia Sullivan opened a foundation dedicated to reuniting families separated by manipulation and emotional abuse, helping thousands of people heal relationships they thought were lost forever. And Robert Galloway became the Director of Human Resources at Sullivan Carlson Enterprises, specializing in creating work environments where human dignity is the most important value. The story of the cleaner's son who saved the most important contract became something more. It became proof that no matter how deep you fall, you can always choose to rise and turn your scars into stars that guide others towards the light. Clara Sullivan had started the day being invisible. She ended it being unforgettable. And that difference was made by the unconditional love of a son who learned that defending your family doesn't mean hiding their mistakes, but helping them transform those mistakes into wisdom that can change the world.